glide bomb sortie rate, which is great to see. Um, on the F-16s, they're doing internal air defense, so intercepting Shaheds and particularly trying to intercept cruise missiles. Saw a claim from, I believe, Zelensky and the MOD today that they had shot down 12 cruise missiles in the latest salvo using F-16s. Um, so, yep, it's good to see that they're using them. But, as previously predicted, they're using them for internal air defense. They're not trying to push them across the lines and go after the glide bombers or anything, because that's just not feasible con.
And it's not feasible because of the plane limitations, like that they're not that's not what they're built for.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is an airframe that was designed in the late 70s. Uh, it's a very capable, very efficient multi-role airframe, but it's not designed to go into multiple overlapping Russian medium, short, and long-range ground-based air defense coverage, and against Russian fighter combat air patrols with AWACS support and longer-range missiles than the F-16s have, with more powerful radars than the F-16s have, in heavy electronic warfare conditions, and try and engage those glide bomb releases that might be anywhere from 40 to 60 kilometers behind the Russian lines. Um, that would be that threat environment, particularly the layered ground-based and air threat, standoff air threat, is something where, even with fifth generation aircraft like the F-35 and a big composite package, you'd want to be pretty careful about doing that. It's something that the West, particularly the US, is able to do, but it's not easy, and it's not zero risk either. Um, but so to expect Ukrainian pilots with a relatively small number of F-16s who are relatively new to the type to do that on their own is just not.
So probably the expectations that some people, at least, maybe have had uh, of the impact that the F-16s would have in Ukraine was probably overhyped.
Yes, it was massively overhyped, both by people in the West who were trying to make the argument to send F-16s, and particularly by the Ukrainians themselves, particularly by the presidential administration and the military. And in many ways, I understand they were trying to secure the long-term future of the Ukrainian Air Force. Which, if the Ukrainian Air Force fighter force is to survive in the medium term, it must transition to Western fighter aircraft. They cannot sustain the MiG-29, Sukhoi-27, Sukhoi-24s forever, because the manufacturer ultimately of spare parts and the ability to support long term is in a hostile country, um, in Russia. So, and their own ability to do so internally has been reduced significantly by Russian strikes very early on in the war and periodically throughout on Ukrainian um, military aviation industrial facilities. Uh, so they do have to transition to Western fighters, and so over time, just the same as they needed to transfer slowly over to Western main battle tanks, for example, ultimately because of ammunition requirements that at some point they were going to run out if they just kept going with T-72, T-80, T-64. They were going to run out of barrels and 115 and 125 millimeter tank ammunition because they weren't able to make them at a sufficiently high scale to sustain it long term with those usage rates, and Western partners don't make them. So you have to transition them over to 120 mil systems so that we can supply them with barrels and ammunition over time. Same with the F-16. So you know in some ways it's understandable that the arguments were perhaps made slightly more with overinflated expectations built into them in order to sell the idea of, if you do this, it will help massively, and therefore you should spend the political capital in each country to get this authorization through. If you just do this, then it will solve all these issues. Um, I don't think it means that the decision to supply F-16 over time was wrong. It's the obvious choice for at least a part of Ukrainian fighter capability. As I've said in other forums, Gripen would be perhaps more operationally suitable for their current needs, but the user base of F-16 and the availability of spare parts and support is very very strong argument for why F-16, is absolutely the basis for a significant chunk of the Ukrainian long-term fighter force plan. But yeah, I mean, the arguments of, well, if we give them to them, they'll achieve air superiority. That was never feasible, and it's one of those areas where, as someone who was consistently saying for years, this is not going to give them air superiority. That's not something that F-16 with AMRAAM can do against those threats, and was in some cases quite angrily put down for it by a lot of people. I hate being wrong about it. I wish they could achieve air superiority with this stuff, but it's not. We as NATO Air Force, in NATO Air Forces, we would not put F-16 in as the first line into that threat environment. As the kind of cutting edge, with all the weapons and enablement and tactical expertise and decades of experience that we have in aggregate in NATO Air Forces. That's partly why the F-35 was built and designed specifically to go after this kind of threat environment, with help and enablement from a whole host of other things. It's those Russian SAM systems work very well.
If you're enjoying this podcast, chances are that you like to know what's going on in the world of geopolitics. And if that's the case, you might want to sign up to my newsletter. It's launching from January, it's completely free, and you can already sign up so that you receive the first edition. You can find the link in the description, so check it out and sign up to stay informed.